The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete floor of Sunshine Animal Shelter as Max stretched his large frame inside kennel number 12. It was the same routine he had followed for over 500 days now. Wake up, stretch, wait for breakfast, and then spend the rest of the day watching people walk by his cage. Max was a beautiful German Shepherd with dark brown and black fur that still held its shine despite the stress of shelter life. His ears stood tall and alert, always listening for any sign that today might be different. But deep down he had started to lose hope that anyone would ever want him. The shelter workers loved Max dearly. They would often stop by his kennel just to scratch behind his ears or slip him an extra treat. Lisa, one of the younger volunteers, always made sure to take him out for longer walks because she knew how much he needed the exercise. But even their kindness couldn't fill the empty space in his heart where a real family should be. Every morning brought new hope, and every evening brought fresh disappointment. Max would watch as families walked through the shelter, their eyes lighting up when they saw the puppies or the smaller dogs. Children would squeal with delight at the playful terriers or gentle lapdogs. But when they reached his kennel, something always seemed to change. Some people would stop and read his information card. 3 years old, German Shepherd mix, good with children, house-trained, knows basic commands. But then they would look at his size, or maybe they had heard stories about his breed being aggressive, and they would move on. Max could sense their hesitation, their fear, and it made his heart sink a little deeper each time. The truth was, Max was one of the gentlest souls you could ever meet. He had never so much as growled at another dog or person in his entire life. When the shelter cats would wander near his kennel, he would simply watch them with curious eyes, never showing any signs of wanting to chase them. During his walks, he was perfectly behaved on the leash, never pulling or trying to run after squirrels or birds. But people couldn't see past his appearance. They saw a big dog, and big dogs meant big responsibility, big food bills, and big problems if something went wrong. At least that's what they thought. The hardest part for Max wasn't the rejection from strangers. It was watching other dogs find their forever homes while he remained behind. He had seen dozens of dogs come and go during his time at the shelter. Some stayed only a few days before finding families. Others, like himself, waited much longer. But eventually, most of them found someone who wanted them. There was Buddy, a golden retriever who had arrived just 2 months ago. A young couple fell in love with him immediately, and within a week he was running around in his new backyard. Then there was Princess, a small white poodle who had been returned twice by families who said she was too energetic. But the third family understood her needs and gave her the active lifestyle she craved. Max was happy for them. Truly, he was. But watching them leave made his own situation feel even more hopeless. Some nights, he would lie on his thin blanket and wonder if there was something wrong with him. Maybe he wasn't friendly enough, or maybe he was too big, or maybe people could sense that his previous family had given him up. The shelter staff tried their best to make him feel special. They featured him on their website and social media pages, sharing photos of him playing in the yard or sitting calmly during training sessions. They wrote beautiful descriptions of his personality, highlighting how smart and loyal he was. But the phone calls and visits that came from these posts never seemed to turn into adoptions. One particularly difficult day, Max overheard 2 volunteers talking about him near his kennel. They thought he was sleeping, but he was listening to every word. "I'm really worried about him," one of them said. "He's been here longer than any dog we've had in the past 2 years. The longer he stays, the harder it becomes for him to adjust to a new home." "I know," replied the other volunteer. "And lately he seems so sad. He barely gets excited about walks anymore, and he's not eating as much as he used to. Dogs can get depressed just like people can." Their words hit Max harder than he expected. He knew they cared about him, but hearing them discuss his situation so openly made everything feel more real. He really might spend the rest of his life in this kennel, watching the world go by through metal bars. The worst moments came on weekends when families would visit in large groups. Parents would bring their children to look at the animals, and the shelter would buzz with excitement and energy. Max would sit up straight in his kennel, putting on his best behavior, hoping that this time would be different. He learned to read the signs. Families with very young children usually went straight to the puppy section. Elderly couples often looked for smaller, calmer dogs. But sometimes, just sometimes, a family would seem like they might be interested in a larger dog like him. One Saturday afternoon, a family with 2 teenage boys stopped in front of his kennel for what felt like forever. The father was asking the shelter worker questions about Max's history and temperament. The boys seemed excited about the idea of having a big dog to play with in their yard. Max's heart started beating faster with hope. But then the mother asked about veterinary costs and how much food a dog his size would eat. When she heard the numbers, her expression changed. Max watched as they had a quiet conversation among themselves, and he could tell by their body language what the answer would be before they even said goodbye. The shelter worker, Jenny, came back to his kennel after the family left. She sat down on the floor next to his cage and spoke to him in the gentle voice she always used. "I'm sorry, boy," she said, reaching through the bars to pet his head. "They really liked you, but they're worried about the expenses. Don't give up hope, though. Your person is out there somewhere, I know it." Max wanted to believe her, but after 18 months of the same disappointments, hope was becoming harder to hold on to. He had started spending more time sleeping during the day, less interested in playing with toys or interacting with visitors. The spark that had once made him special was slowly dimming. The other shelter animals had begun to notice the change. In him, too. The dog in the kennel next to his, a cheerful beagle named Scout, would try to cheer him up by sharing gossip about the staff or making jokes about the visiting families. But even Scout's endless optimism couldn't lift Max's spirits anymore. As another day ended and the lights dimmed in the shelter, Max curled up on his blanket and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring another day of waiting, another day of hoping, and probably another day of disappointment. He had no way of knowing that his life was about to change in ways he never could have imagined. But sometimes, just when things seem darkest, that's exactly when miracles decide to show up. The morning started like any other at Sunshine Animal Shelter, but something felt different in the air. Max was lying in his usual spot when he heard footsteps approaching his kennel. These weren't the familiar sounds of the shelter staff doing their morning rounds. These steps were slower, more deliberate, and they stopped right in front of his cage. Max looked up to see a man in his 50s standing there, studying him with kind but tired eyes. The stranger had weathered hands and wore a simple flannel shirt that had seen better days. Unlike the families who usually visited, this man wasn't looking at all the other dogs. He was focused entirely on Max. "This is the one I told you about over the phone," Jenny, the shelter worker, said as she joined them. "He's been with us for 18 months now. One of the sweetest dogs we've ever had, but people tend to get nervous about his size." The man nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off Max. "What's his story?" His previous family had to give him up when they moved to an apartment that didn't allow large dogs. He's house-trained, knows basic commands, and he's great with other animals. The only thing he's never really had is a stable home where he could just be himself. Max watched as the man crouched down to his level. This was different from how other visitors approached him. There was no hesitation, no fear. The man extended his hand through the bars, letting Max sniff his fingers before gently scratching behind his ears. "Hey there, big guy," the man said, softly. "I'm Tom. I heard you might be looking for a new home." Something in Tom's voice made Max's tail wag for the first time in weeks. It wasn't the excited, hopeful wagging he used to do when potential families visited. This was different. It felt like recognition, like he was looking at someone who understood something about him that others had missed. Tom spent the next hour at the shelter, not just with Max, but learning everything he could about caring for a large dog. He asked practical questions about food, exercise needs, and veterinary care. But he also asked about Max's personality, his likes and dislikes, and what would make him feel most comfortable in a new environment. "I live alone on a small farm about 20 minutes outside town," Tom explained to Jenny. "It's quiet, lots of space to run around, and I could use the company. I've been thinking about getting a dog for a while now, but I wanted to find one that really needed a home." Jenny smiled, but Max could see the cautious hope in her eyes. She had been disappointed too many times before when families change their minds at the last minute. "There is one thing you should know," Tom continued. "I'm a veteran and sometimes I have rough days. I'm not looking for a dog to fix my problems, but I think we might be able to help each other out. Does that make sense?" It made perfect sense to Jenny, and somehow it made perfect sense to Max too. When Tom filled out the adoption paperwork, Max could hardly believe it was really happening. After 18 months of waiting, someone actually wanted him. The ride to Tom's farm was Max's first time in a car in over a year. He sat in the back seat, watching the world rush by through the window. The shelter had faded into the distance, and with it all those months of uncertainty and longing. But as excited as he was, Max couldn't shake a small feeling of worry. What if this didn't work out either? What if Tom decided he was too much trouble and brought him back? Tom seemed to sense his nervousness. "It's okay, buddy," he said, glancing at Max in the rearview mirror. "I know this is scary. New places always are. But we're going to figure this out together." When they arrived at the farm, Max was amazed by how much space there was. The property stretched out in all directions with open fields, a small barn, and a comfortable-looking house with a wraparound porch. This was nothing like the cramped kennel he had called home for so long. Tom showed him around the property, pointing out the boundaries and explaining the daily routine. There were chickens in a coop, a few goats in a fenced pasture, and an old tractor that Tom used to maintain the land. It was simple, peaceful, and exactly the kind of place Max had dreamed about during his darkest days at the shelter. But adjusting to his new life wasn't as easy as Max had hoped. The first few nights were the hardest. Tom had set up a comfortable bed for him in the living room, but Max found it difficult to sleep. Every sound made him alert, wondering if someone was coming to take him away again. He had been abandoned before, and the fear of it happening again was stronger than he wanted to admit. Tom was patient with him, never pushing too hard or expecting too much too soon. He established a routine that helped Max feel more secure. Morning walks around the property, breakfast on the porch, and evening conversations where Tom would sit on the steps and Max would lie beside him, both of them watching the sunset. "You know what I like about you?" Tom said one evening as they sat together. "You don't ask questions about things that are hard to explain. Sometimes I have days where the world feels too loud or too bright or just too much. On those days, having you here makes everything feel a little more manageable." Max didn't fully understand what Tom meant, but he could sense when his new owner was struggling. On those difficult days, Tom would move more slowly, speak more quietly, and sometimes sit for long periods, just staring out at the fields. Max learned to stay close during these times, offering his presence without being demanding. Slowly, both of them began to heal. Tom found that having Max around gave him a sense of purpose he had been missing. The dog needed regular meals, exercise, and attention, which created a structure that helped Tom manage his own challenges. And Max discovered that he had found someone who truly understood the value of second chances. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Max learned the farm routine, helping Tom with simple tasks like herding the chickens back to their coop in the evening or keeping watch while Tom worked on repairs around the property. Tom learned Max's signals, understanding when he needed more exercise or when he was feeling anxious about something. 3 months into their life together, Max had transformed from the sad, hopeless dog he had been at the shelter. His coat was shinier, his eyes were brighter, and most importantly, his tail wagged with genuine happiness. He had found his purpose, and more than that, he had found his family. Neither Tom nor Max could have predicted that their quiet life on the farm was about to change in ways that would surprise them both. Sometimes the best things in life happen when you're not looking for them, and sometimes the most ordinary days can become the most extraordinary ones. The morning mist was just beginning to lift from the fields when Tom and Max set out for their daily walk. It was early June, and the air carried the sweet smell of wildflowers that grew along the edge of the forest bordering Tom's property. This had become their favorite time of day, when the world was quiet and they could enjoy each other's company without any distractions. Max had been living with Tom for 3 months now, and their routine had become as natural as breathing. They would walk the same path every morning, checking on the fence lines and enjoying the peaceful start to each day. Max loved these walks because it gave him a chance to explore all the interesting scents that appeared overnight, while Tom appreciated the gentle exercise and the calming effect it had on his mind. But this morning felt different somehow. Max seemed more alert than usual, his ears constantly turning toward sounds that Tom couldn't hear. About halfway through their usual route, near the spot where the farm property met the dense woodland, Max suddenly stopped walking entirely. His whole body went rigid, and his nose started working overtime, testing the air for something that had caught his attention. Tom had learned to read Max's body language over the past few months, and this wasn't his usual curiosity about a rabbit or deer. This was something else entirely. "What is it, boy?" Tom asked, stopping beside his dog. "What do you smell?" Max's response was unlike anything Tom had seen from him before. The dog began whining softly, a sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. His tail wasn't wagging with excitement, but rather moving in slow, anxious sweeps. Then, without any warning, Max bolted toward the tree line. "Max!" Tom called after him. "Max, come back here!" But Max was already disappearing into the thick forest, moving with a determination that Tom had never witnessed before. His usual obedience to commands seemed to have vanished completely, replaced by an urgency that Tom couldn't understand. Tom felt a familiar wave of panic wash over him. This was exactly the kind of situation that triggered his anxiety. He had grown to depend on Max's steady presence, and now his companion was gone, racing into woods that Tom knew could be dangerous. There were steep ravines, hidden sinkholes, and plenty of places where a dog could get hurt or lost. Taking a deep breath to calm himself, Tom started following Max's path into the forest. He could hear his dogs barking in the distance, but the sound seemed to be moving further away with each passing minute. The undergrowth was thick, and Tom had to push through branches and climb over fallen logs to keep moving forward. "Max!" he shouted again, his voice echoing through the trees. "Where are you, buddy?" The barking continued, but now it had changed. Instead of the excited barking Max usually did when chasing wildlife, this sounded more like an alert, like he was trying to communicate something important. Tom pressed on, following the sound as best he could through the increasingly difficult terrain. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Tom finally heard human voices mixed in with Max's barking. His heart rate spiked, with worry. Had his dog gotten into trouble with other people? Was someone hurt? The voices sounded distressed, and Tom pushed through the last cluster of thick bushes to find himself at the edge of a rocky ravine. What he saw below took his breath away. Max was standing at the bottom of the depression about 15 feet down, next to a small figure huddled against the rocky wall. It was a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, and she was clearly in distress. "Help!" the girl called up when she saw Tom. "I've been stuck down here all night. I can't climb out." Tom's military training kicked in immediately. He quickly assessed the situation, looking for the safest way to reach the child while calling out reassurances. "It's okay. I'm coming down to help you. Are you hurt?" "My ankle really hurts," the girl replied, her voice shaky but brave. "I fell down here yesterday evening when I was trying to find my way back to our campsite. I've been calling for help, but nobody could hear me until your dog found me." Max had positioned himself protectively next to the girl, and Tom could see that. His dog had somehow understood the seriousness of the situation. This wasn't a game or an adventure for Max. He had genuinely found someone who needed help, and had done everything he could to bring that help to them. Using his belt and a fallen branch, Tom managed to create a makeshift rope system to lower himself into the ravine safely. The girl, who introduced herself as Lucy, explained that she had been on a camping trip with her family at the state park about 2 miles away. She had wandered off to explore while her parents were setting up their tent, gotten turned around in the woods, and ended up falling into this hidden ravine just as darkness was falling. "I was so scared," Lucy admitted as Tom checked her injured ankle. "I thought nobody would ever find me. Then I heard your dog barking, and I started calling back to him. He's been keeping me company all morning." Indeed, Max had somehow managed to climb down into the ravine. though Tom couldn't figure out how he had done it safely. The dog was now sitting calmly beside Lucy, as if he understood that his job was to keep her calm while Tom figured out how to get them all out safely. The rescue itself took another hour of careful planning and execution. Tom used his cell phone to call for emergency help, and soon the ravine was filled with the voices of search and rescue teams, paramedics, and Lucy's frantic parents. But through it all, Max remained by the little girl's side, providing comfort and reassurance with his steady presence. When the paramedics finally lifted Lucy out of the ravine on a stretcher, her first concern was for Max. "Is the dog going to be okay?" she asked. "He saved my life. If he hadn't found me and brought help, I don't know what would have happened." Tom felt a surge of pride unlike anything he had experienced in years. His dog, the same animal that had been overlooked and unwanted for 18 months at the shelter, had just performed an act of genuine heroism. Max had used instincts that Tom didn't even know he possessed to locate a child in distress and bring help to her. As they finally made their way out of the forest, Tom kept thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. If Max had been adopted by someone else, or if Tom had chosen a different dog, or if they had taken their walk at a different time, Lucy might still be trapped in that ravine. But somehow, everything had aligned perfectly. The dog that nobody wanted had turned out to be exactly the hero that someone desperately needed. The story of Max's heroic rescue spread faster than Tom could have ever imagined. Within hours of Lucy being safely reunited with her family, news of the shelter dog who had saved a lost child began making its way through the small town's social networks. By the next morning, Tom's quiet farm had become the center of attention he never wanted. It started with a phone call from the local newspaper. Then came the radio station. By afternoon, a news van was parked in Tom's driveway, and a reporter was asking if she could interview him and Max about the rescue. Tom's first instinct was to say no. He valued his privacy and had chosen farm life specifically to avoid this kind of attention. But when he looked at Max, who was sitting calmly beside him on the porch, Tom realized this wasn't really about him. This was about giving credit where credit was due, and maybe helping other people understand that shelter dogs weren't broken or unwanted for good reasons. They were just waiting for the right opportunity to show what they could do. The first interview was awkward for Tom, but Max seemed to enjoy all the attention. The reporter asked about the rescue, about Max's background at the shelter, and about how they had found each other. When she asked Tom what he thought had motivated Max to go searching for Lucy, Tom paused for a long moment. "I think he knew what it felt like to be lost and forgotten," Tom finally said. Maybe when he heard her calling for help, something inside him just couldn't walk away from someone who needed him. The local news segment aired that evening, and by the next morning, the story had been picked up by regional networks. Social media posts about Max started appearing everywhere, with people sharing the video and adding their own comments about the importance of adopting shelter animals. Lucy's parents drove out to the farm 3 days after the rescue to thank Tom and Max in person. Lucy's ankle was in a walking cast, but she was otherwise perfectly fine. She had insisted on coming to see her hero dog as soon as the doctors said she could travel. "I told all my friends at school about Max," Lucy said, sitting on the porch steps while Max lay contentedly beside her. "I told them that he used to live in a shelter and that nobody wanted him because he was too big. But he was exactly the right size to help me when I needed it." Her words hit Tom harder than he expected. Here was a child who understood something that most adults had missed. Max wasn't too big or too much trouble. He was exactly what he needed to be. Exactly when he needed to be it. The story continued to grow, and soon Tom was receiving calls from people across the state. Other veterans reached out to share their own experiences with rescue animals. Families who had adopted shelter dogs sent photos and stories about their own pets. But most surprisingly, Sunshine Animal Shelter began receiving more adoption inquiries than they had seen in months. Jenny, the shelter worker who had helped Tom adopt Max, called to tell him about the sudden increase in interest. "We've had more people asking about older dogs and larger breeds in the past week than we usually get in a month," she said, her voice filled with excitement. Max's story is helping people see that these animals aren't problems to be solved. They're companions waiting to happen. The fire department chief, Captain Rodriguez, reached out with a surprising request. Would Tom and Max be willing to visit local elementary schools as part of their safety education program? The idea was to teach children about what to do if they ever got lost in the woods, while also promoting the value of animal rescue and adoption. Tom's initial reaction was to decline. Speaking to groups of children wasn't exactly in his comfort zone, and he worried about Max being overwhelmed by all the attention. But when he thought about Lucy and how the experience had changed both of their lives, he realized he couldn't say no. Their first school visit was at Pine Valley Elementary, the same school Lucy attended. Tom was nervous as they walked into the gymnasium filled with excited children, but Max seemed completely at ease. The dog had always been good with kids, but Tom was amazed to see how naturally he took to being the center of attention. Captain Rodriguez introduced them and told the story of the rescue, but then he asked Tom to share what he had learned about Max's background. Tom found himself talking about the shelter, about how Max had waited 18 months for a home, and about how the best things in life sometimes come from the most unexpected places. Max didn't set out to be a hero, Tom told the children. He was just being himself, using the instincts and the heart that he was born with. Sometimes that's all it takes to make a real difference in someone's life. The children had dozens of questions. They wanted to know how Max had found Lucy, whether he had been scared, and if he understood that he was a hero. But the question that stuck with Tom the most came from a quiet girl in the front row. "Do you think Max is happy now?" she asked. Tom looked down at his dog, who was lying calmly beside him, occasionally accepting gentle pets from the children who approached. Max's tail was wagging slowly. His eyes were bright and alert, and there was a contentment in his posture that Tom recognized as pure happiness. "Yes," Tom said simply. "I think he's exactly where he's supposed to be." After the school visit, something had changed in both Tom and Max. The attention and recognition had given them a new sense of purpose that went beyond their quiet life on the farm. They started visiting the shelter regularly, not just for publicity, but to spend time with the animals who were still waiting for their own second chances. Tom found himself becoming an advocate for older shelter animals, sharing his story with other potential adopters and helping them understand that age and size weren't obstacles to overcome, but rather signs of a dog's experience and stability. Max seemed to understand his new role as well. During their shelter visits, he would spend time with the more anxious dogs, somehow communicating a sense of calm and hope that the shelter workers said was remarkable to witness. The local newspaper featured them in a follow-up story about the positive impact they were having on animal adoption rates. The headline read, "From shelter dog to local hero, Max's story inspires community change," and it included photos of Tom and Max visiting the shelter and meeting with families who had been inspired to adopt their own rescue animals. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Lucy's teacher had assigned her class to write letters to their heroes, and Lucy chose to write to Max. Tom received the letter in the mail a few weeks after their school visit. "Dear Max," the letter began in careful handwriting. "Thank you for saving my life and for teaching me that the best heroes are the ones who help people, just because it's the right thing to do. I hope you know that you're the most special dog in the whole world." That evening, as Tom sat on his porch reading the letter aloud to Max, he realized that the recognition and attention had never really been the point. The real reward was knowing that they had made a difference, and that their story was helping other animals find the homes they deserved. 2 years had passed since that morning when Max had bolted into the forest to save Lucy, and life on Tom's farm had transformed in ways neither of them could have imagined. What started as a simple rescue had grown into something much bigger, touching lives throughout their community and beyond. The most remarkable change was in Max himself. The nervous, hopeless dog who had spent 18 months in a shelter kennel had become confident, purposeful, and deeply content. But more than that, he had discovered abilities within himself that nobody, including Tom, had ever suspected were there. It began 6 months after the rescue, when Dr. Patricia Wells from the Regional Search and Rescue Team contacted Tom. She had heard about Max's natural ability to locate Lucy in the forest and wondered if he might be interested in formal training. Most search and rescue dogs started their training as puppies, but Max's instincts were so strong that Dr. Wells believed he could learn the skills even as an adult. Tom was hesitant at first. He worried that the intensive training might be too stressful for Max, who had already been through so much upheaval in his life. But when they attended their first training session, it became clear that Max had found his true calling. The dog took to the work with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone. He learned to follow scent trails, to signal when he found someone, and to work calmly under pressure. His size, which had once been seen as a disadvantage, turned out to be perfect for the physical demands of search and rescue work. His gentle nature made him excellent at comforting people in distress. Within a year of starting his training, Max had become a certified search and rescue dog. He had participated in 5 successful rescues, including finding an elderly man with dementia who had wandered away from his care facility, and locating 2 teenagers who had gotten lost during a hiking trip in the state park. But Max's transformation went even deeper than his work with the search and rescue team. Tom had noticed that his dog seemed to have a special gift for sensing when people were struggling emotionally. This observation led to another unexpected opportunity. The local VA hospital had recently started a therapy dog program, and when they heard about Max's gentle nature and his work with the search and rescue team, they invited him to become part of their team. After completing the necessary training and health certifications, Max began visiting veterans who were dealing with their own challenges. Every Tuesday morning, Tom and Max would arrive at the hospital, and Max would spend the day moving from room to room, offering comfort to patients who were recovering from physical injuries or working through emotional trauma. The hospital staff were amazed at Max's intuitive ability to know exactly how to approach each person. Some patients wanted an energetic companion who would play and interact with them. Others needed a calm presence who would simply lie quietly beside their bed. Max seemed to understand instinctively what each person needed, adjusting his behavior accordingly. One of the most meaningful relationships Max developed was with Robert, a young veteran who had lost his leg in an overseas deployment. Robert had been struggling with depression since his injury, often refusing to participate in physical therapy or social activities. But something about Max's presence seemed to reach him in a way that nothing else had. "It's like he understands," Robert told Tom during one of their visits. "He doesn't try to fix me or tell me everything will be okay. He just sits with me and lets me know I'm not alone." Over several months, Tom watched as Robert's interaction with Max helped him begin to heal emotionally. The young veteran started looking forward to Max's visits and eventually began participating more actively in his recovery program. When Robert was finally ready to be discharged from the hospital, he asked Tom about getting a dog of his own. "Would you come with me to look at some shelter dogs?" Robert asked. "I think I'm ready to have a companion, but I want to make sure I choose the right one." That trip to Sunshine Animal Shelter was emotional for Tom. Walking through the same kennels where Max had spent so many lonely months, seeing the hope and longing in the eyes of the animals still waiting for homes, reminded him of how far they had all come. Robert ended up adopting a 3-year-old mixed breed named Charlie who had been at the shelter for over a year. Like Max, Charlie was a larger dog who had been overlooked by many potential families. But Robert saw past the size and the sad shelter statistics to the loyal companion underneath. The ripple effects of Max's story continued to spread throughout the community. Sunshine Animal Shelter had established what they called the Max Fund, a program that provided training and support for shelter dogs who showed potential for working roles. Dogs who might otherwise spend months or years waiting for adoption were now being trained as therapy animals, service dogs, and even search and rescue companions. Jenny, who still worked at the shelter, often told Tom about the changes she had witnessed. "We've had more success stories in the past 2 years than in the previous 5 years combined," she said during one of their visits. Max's story helped people understand that these animals aren't damaged goods waiting to be fixed. They're individuals with their own gifts, just waiting for the right opportunity to share them. Lucy, now 12 years old, had become one of Max's most dedicated supporters. She visited the farm regularly with her family, and had started volunteering at the animal shelter on weekends. She often told people that meeting Max had taught her that heroes could come from the most unexpected places. Before Max found me, in the woods I thought heroes were people in movies or books, Lucy explained during a school presentation she gave about animal rescue. But Max showed me that real heroes are all around us. They're just waiting for their chance to help. The transformation wasn't limited to Max and the people he directly helped. Tom himself had discovered a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in years. Speaking at schools, participating in adoption events, and working with other veterans had given him a way to channel his own experiences into something positive. His anxiety and depression hadn't disappeared completely, but having Max as a partner in helping others had given him tools for managing his challenges. On difficult days, focusing on Max's needs and their shared work provided structure and meaning that helped him cope. The most incredible part of Max's transformation was how natural it all seemed. The dog, who had once been considered too big and too much trouble, had found ways to use those very qualities to make a difference in the world. His size made him an effective search and rescue dog. His gentle nature made him a perfect therapy animal. His experience with abandonment and loss made him uniquely qualified to comfort others who were struggling. As Tom sat on his porch one evening watching Max play with Charlie during one of Robert's visits, he thought about the chain of events that had brought them all together. A dog that nobody wanted had become exactly what so many people needed. A veteran struggling with his own demons had found purpose in helping others heal. A little girl lost in the woods had inspired a community to look at shelter animals with new eyes. The sun was setting over the farm, casting golden light across the fields where Max loved to run. Tom smiled as he watched his dog, no longer the hopeless animal from kennel number 12, but a confident, purposeful companion who had transformed not just his own life, but the lives of countless others. Sometimes the most incredible transformations happen not because we set out to change the world, but because we're brave enough to give second chances to those who need them most.